Hello again, fair folk of the worldwide computer web, and welcome to the gluten-free basket of RPG bounty, otherwise known as Myth Brigade. Now, my name is Jason, and I'm a GM, marshal, keeper, and herder of cats here on the channel. But today, I'm here for another episode of Rules Bites and another trail ride into Savage Worlds Adventure Edition by the Wildcards over at Pinnacle Entertainment. Now, last time we took a little break from combat to cover powers on the count I need a little bit of detox from all that.
Bah! Oh, lands!
But today we're back at it with a look at what they call situational rules. And there's a damn good number of them, so we're actually going to break this section down into 2, maybe even 3 videos. That way we can take our time and have some fun along the way. Besides, that darned algorithm's got the attention span of a horsefly, a snorting ghost rock. So buckle up and let's get her done quick. Now, as we've seen in earlier episodes, the Savage Worlds combat system is dead simple. You pick up a trait die and a wild die, you make a roll, modify for difficulty, and hope you beat your target of 4, or maybe the enemy's parry. This keeps the game moving fast and tensions high. There are times, though, when a couple of extra rules can actually solve for more complex scenarios, and maybe even add a little more flavor and excitement to the game. For this, the core rules offer situational rules, which you can find on pages 97 through 109. So grab that PDF or an actual book, and let's dive in.
Sir, the enemy elites, they're coming over that rise.
I see that, Private. But I've only got a D6 in shooting, so trying to bank that bonus, you know?
Yeah, makes sense.
The Adventure Edition rules for ranged attacks give characters the benefit of the doubt and assume they can use their weapon effectively in combat even when they're moving around a bit. Still, factors like cover, range, or the desire to place a shot introduce some heavy penalties to the attack roll. The aim action allows the character to spend a turn aiming at a target and negate up to 4 of these penalties. If no penalties are in effect at the time, aiming adds +2 to the shooting roll. Now note that the aiming benefit only applies to the turn immediately after the aiming action occurs. And while aiming, the character needs to be stationary and generally able to actually aim the weapon. So aiming from a vehicle or another moving platform is possible, but the GM should think about the terrain and how erratic the driver or pilot's actions might be. Now, we'll discuss this a little bit more when we get into the vehicle-based stuff, but take it as food for thought. Now, players, the aiming action is a pretty cool option if you're not really certain what your character should do. Don't let your character sit idle for an entire turn. Instead, if there's an enemy on the scene and violence seems imminent, take aim and bank that bonus. Area effect attacks encompass things like grenades and dynamite, spells, dragon's breath, cruise missiles, or any type of attack that impacts an area. For these attacks, sorting damage is pretty simple. The tricky part is to quickly determine if the attack covers the area intended and who's caught in it. For this, the system offers a pretty simple framework. First, the player chooses the correct blast or cone template for the attack. Guidance on which template to use can be found in the description for the weapon or spell, right along with the damage, the range, and all those other details. Before rolling the dice, the player places that template on the table, representing where the attack is intended to land. Then, it's time for a skill check. And this is typically shooting, but it could also be athletics if a thrown weapon like a grenade is involved. Remember to apply any situational modifiers and such when resolving the roll. For attacks using a cone template, success means the attack covers the area the player intended. Any target even partially beneath that template is affected unless they successfully evade, which is something we'll talk about later. As with most attacks, a raise on the attack roll causes additional damage. Now, failure on a cone attack means the attack either fizzles out completely or misses in a way that won't harm any combatants. Now, GMs, feel free to light the surroundings on fire, singe hair, or whatever you want to kind of paint the picture, but failed cone attacks don't deal damage to anyone. Blast attacks are handled a little bit differently. So as before, the player picks a small or large blast template and places it on the table to declare an intended target. A shooting or athletics roll is then made and modified as usual. Success, as before, means the attack lands as intended, dealing damage to anyone even partially within the template. Now, as always, bonus damage is assessed in the case of a raise on that attack roll. Unlike the failure approach for cone attacks, though, blast attacks use a concept called deviation. So you threw it, it's going to hit somewhere, it's going to blow up, and it's going to do some damage when it does, just maybe not like you'd intended. So to work out deviation, we first determine the distance we're off by rolling 1d6 for thrown weapons and 2d6 for fired projectiles. The total is then modified for range by multiplying times 2 for medium, 3 for long, and a whopping 4 for extreme. The final result is treated as inches or squares on the table. Next, we roll 1d12 to set the direction of that deviation. Now for this, we use a clock face concept with 12 o'clock oriented at the top of your map and each d12 result representing an hour position on the clock. It sounds like a lot, but it's actually pretty easy. Here's an example. So Sergeant Bishop is attacking with a frag grenade. He fails the athletics check for the throw, meaning his attempt will deviate from the planned target. He rolls a 2 on his d6 for the thrown weapon, and then multiplies that total by 2 for the medium range. This gives him a total of 4 inches or 4 squares on the table. He then rolls a d12 to set the direction for the deviation, getting an 11. So this means the attack lands 4 squares behind and a little to the left of the target. So it doesn't get all those pesky bad guys, but it does ruin this guy's day. Now, combatants can use cover to protect themselves against a blast or cone attack as allowed by the GM. The table on page 99 will help sort out the appropriate bonus or penalty based on the completeness of the cover and the materials involved.
Do accept my apologies, Esmeralda. No movement of spells for you.
In the throes of adventure, there are always some situations that could affect character mobility. And this could be an attack from a tangling weapon, a misstep into a giant spider's web, a spell that binds an enemy's limbs, quicksand, a bear trap, or even a great big bear hug from Grubendervazen, the hill giant.
That's Grubendervazen.
For this, we have 2 new conditions and some rules that we'll need to cover. So let's start with the conditions. Now those are entangled, and even worse, bound. Entangled characters are unable to move and are distracted until they break free from their bonds. Physical actions of some kinds are still possible based on the kind of entanglement, so the GM should be very clear on the specifics. Bound characters are also unable to move and distracted, but they add the vulnerable condition as well for as long as they remain bound. Now think of this as the poor sod who's tied to a railroad track with 40 feet of hemp rope. He's not going anywhere, and he's pretty open to attack in the meantime. That's a great question. Attempting to get out of the bound or entangled conditions takes a full action and requires an athletics check or a strength check at -2. With a success, entangled heroes throw off their bonds and are good to go. Bound heroes, though, only improve their situation to entangled with the first success. So think of this as sorting out the knot on that hemp rope, only to have to take the time to actually shimmy free of it completely. The remaining entangled condition is then handled by an athletics or strength check with a second action or on the player's next turn. Now GMs note that bound characters succeeding with a raise miraculously break free of their bonds, skipping the entangled step entirely. If you're entangled or bound by a grappling enemy, you perform an opposed athletics or opposed strength check at -2. If the victim is successful, they break free, or at least improve the situation from bound to entangled. Now we'll dive a little bit deeper into grappling mechanics next time, but that's the gist of it. If the condition is caused by a device, the roll approach is almost the same. So the victim's choice of a strength check at -2 or an athletics check. But instead of being opposed, that roll is actually modified by the type of device. So maybe we're dealing with magical manacles made of mithril carrying a -4 penalty. Success is handled in the same way here, removing 1 level for base success and 2 levels with a raise. Now finally, if they're able to move enough to do so, entangled and bound characters can destroy an entangling device using the rules for every now and then, a character will want to kick in a locked door, break a window, smash a padlock off a steamer trunk, or maybe even break a weapon. Now the book points out that pretty much anything can be broken over time and with enough determination. So the rules here are more for situations when that break needs to happen right now. When attempting to break things that are held, so maybe the crystal in a necromancer's wand, the character must make an attack roll against the wielder's parry. Stationary or fixed objects use a target number of 2, because they're really not doing much to defend themselves. Failure means the character misses or just fails to find a spot in the object that's weak enough to do damage. Success deals damage according to the attack being used, and that damage is compared to the object's hardness in the same way that it would be usually compared to the opponent's toughness. If the damage is equal to or exceeds that hardness value, the object... Now it's important to note that the rules for breaking stuff don't allow for bonus damage, and damage rolls against objects don't ace. So if you're using a die roller like the one in Roll20 or Foundry, watch those automated roll totals. Now this may seem a little weird, but Adventure Edition points out that the acing mechanic is more to represent characters finding vital areas in a creature or a more complex device like a supercomputer or a vehicle or a robot. Now the final consideration for breaking things is damage types, which is essentially a grown-up game of Rochambeau. So you're not going to shoot your way through a wooden door with a revolver, and you're not going to use a pocket knife to cut through a set of metal handcuffs. So when the players ask, and they will ask, the GM should put a little thought as to whether or not the breaking attempt is even possible.
Well, since it's my turn, I reckon I'll take a free action and let you know that I'm going to shoot you in the index finger of your right hand. Sorry about your piano career.
Maybe your opponent is about to hurl a vial of acid at an unsuspecting ally. Maybe your target has a hostage placed in front of him like a meat shield. Maybe you're taking a leg shot to stop an enemy from escaping so you can interrogate her later. So these are all examples of making called shots, and there's nothing more dramatic in the heat of the moment. Shots like this carry a penalty based on the area of the enemy you're trying to hit, or more importantly, the scale of the area you're trying to hit. So page 99 offers examples of these penalties on a target of normal scale, so a human, an elf, a gray alien. Yeah, I did that. So let's consider an example. Kaiben, a wily space pirate, is in the midst of a battle with some raiders from a rival gang. One of those raiders pulls out a plasma grenade and is about to toss it across the cargo bay. To avoid a possible hull breach or just being blown to bits, Kaiben needs to stop the enemy from activating that device. He decides to make a called shot at the raider's hand, which carries a -4 penalty. This stacks with the -2 penalty for medium range, giving him a total penalty of -6 on that shooting roll. Thankfully, Kaiben rolls a 12 after a much needed ace and scores that hit. When we determine damage as usual, penalties are a little tougher on smaller things like an item worn on a belt, a cybernetic eye, or the cooling hose under the arm of a rampaging robot. For larger things like, say, Cthulhu's big toe, there might actually be bonuses that apply. The table on page 106 gives some scale to modifier examples to help the GM make the right call in the moment. Combatants could and absolutely should leverage cover to make themselves more difficult targets. This could mean diving behind a concrete barricade, ducking into a doorway, hiding in a ditch, or even using an opponent as a meat shield. Depending on how much of the body is covered, characters can actually impose up to -8 in penalties to an assailant's roll. The table for this is on page 99. Now, some characters may have the ability to attack through obstacles or cover. This could be an armor-piercing weapon, a powerful spell, or some sort of innate ability. In these cases, the GM determines if the attack would have hit without the cover modifier, keeping in mind any other penalties that would still apply. If the attack would have been successful, then the cover doesn't cause the attack to miss, but instead it acts as armor, reducing the damage depending on the material. The object's armor value from the table on page 99 is added to any other protection the characters may have when final damage is calculated. Victims of melee attacks may choose to focus all their energy on protecting themselves by using the defense maneuver. This takes the character's entire turn and can't be chained in any sort of multi-action sequence. Movement is possible, but only at the character's base pace. Now, this may seem like a hefty price, but the benefit of defense is a whopping +4 to parry until the player's next turn. Sometimes a character wants to disarm an opponent rather than take them out, or maybe to make it easier to take them out. Trying to disarm first requires the declaration of what the character is going to target in order to pull it off. So either hitting the weapon directly or maybe the enemy's limb. An attack is then made against the stated target using the called shot rules that we just went over. Hitting a weapon directly has two considerations. First, damage is rolled and compared to the item's hardness, as we discussed with breaking things. This could mean that the object is actually broken even if the enemy hangs on, which requires a strength roll with a target number of the damage total. Sounds kind of crazy, but I'll explain. So let's say a bandit has the posse pinned down with a Gatling pistol. The party agrees he has to be taken alive as he might have some useful information on recent train robberies. So Bart decides to call a shot against the bandit's gun and makes his roll despite hefty penalties for range and that called shot. He rolls a 10 for damage, which doesn't break the weapon, but now the bandit has to get a 10 or more on his strength roll or drop the gun off the cliff. Remember, no aces are bonus to damage against these objects. If the disarm attempt hits the wielder's hand or limb and achieves a shaken or wound result, the enemy must make an immediate strength roll to hang on to the weapon. What's worse, that roll is penalized at -2 for a shaken result and -4 for a wound, on top of any other active penalties. As we saw with the entangled and bound conditions, some situations can leave a character distracted or vulnerable. If this happens, the condition along with its penalties last until the end of the next turn. Now, distracted characters suffer a -2 penalty to all trait rolls for that round. And conversely, vulnerable grants +2 to any action or attack made against the vulnerable character. Getting the drop on an enemy occurs when the target is pretty much unaware of the attack or simply unable to defend against it. This is typically granted on attacks that are up close and personal, like that pistol whip to the back of the noggin. But it could be used in other scenarios as well if the enemy is suitably unaware. Now, getting the drop grants a +4 penalty to both the attack and damage rolls for a single attack against the target. If the attack is successful and deals enough damage to shake or wound the target, the enemy must then make an immediate vigor check or be knocked unconscious. If the blow happened to be a called headshot, that vigor roll is at -2. Enemies knocked out by getting the drop stay that way for about a half hour unless revived or unless the GM decides there's a dramatic reason they should wake up. Certain attacks are pretty easy to see coming, like a dragon's breath, a flamethrower, maybe certain spell effects. If a character is aware of such an attack, he or she may choose to evade, making an athletics check at -2 along with any other situational modifiers. Success means the character escapes harm. For area effects, the GM should place the evading character just outside of the blast or cone template, so safe but not out of combat completely. One note here, if an attack doesn't specifically say it can be evaded, this rule may not be used. So players, don't get your hopes up when you're staring down the barrel of that. All right, that's it for part 1 of our coverage of the Situational Rules in Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. We'll pick up next time with Fatigue and see how far we get from there. If you learned something, or if you just had a good time along the way, please go ahead and hit that like button. Give us a comment. Subscribe for more live streams, game reviews, industry insiders, and of course, Rules Bites right here on Myth Brigade. As always, I'm thankful for your support, all of your feedback, and for the community that you've helped us create here on the internet. Until next time, I think our friend Philosophical Undead Cowboy just may have some parting words of wisdom.
It's always good to have a look what you're about to eat. Might not be important to know what it is. Sure as hell is important to know what it was.